Funny how things come in full circle sometimes, because the second time I heard about Minecraft was when I was researching today's case. A case of a child who is currently serving 5 years in jail for wanting to blow up a police station built in Minecraft. What began as a simple video game spiraled into a courtroom nightmare, a case that sparked debate about juvenile justice, human rights, national security, and surprisingly Minecraft. Let's dive in. A few not-so-quick disclaimers. This case is unique because no official court records, materials, transcripts, protocols have been made to public. This level of withholding is understandable because it involves minors. Despite this, I spent countless hours reviewing interviews, witness statements, journalistic investigations, lawyer comments, police videos, Telegram channels, and so on. All of these sources I mentioned are in Russian. While I am a native, I dedicated a significant amount of time not just to translating the materials for you, but also to adjusting for language differences. For example, terms like suspended sentence make sense in Russian, but better understood by English speakers if I use probation instead. Another disclaimer, people tell me that I give way too many details in my videos. And in the case like this, I would rather you knowing the boy's favorite snack than miss something important. You can also listen to the video in 1.5 speed. Just promise me you're not gonna fall asleep on me, okay? Have you ever heard about the phrase "vo from wit"? Well, this is a very common phrase that you can hear in Russian. Phrase comes from a comedy entitled "Vo from wit." It was written by Alexander Griboyedov, a Russian dude, who wrote not just a comedy. This was a brutal critique of Moscow's shallow, self-absorbed society. The main character of the play, Chatsky, said this: "The happy ones are the ones who are dumb, for they are always welcome everywhere." End quote. Ouch. Well, this went viral. In the 19th century version of viral, the play itself wasn't published for decades, but the copies were passed around underground, whispered among the oppressed, and shared by those who felt that the system failed them. Eventually, Chatsky gets rejected, ostracized by the conformists, and was dead in the eyes of the society. The price he paid for challenging the system. Although the play was written in 1824, Vo from wit dares to ask a question that still feels dangerous today. What crime is there in thinking? FSB building explosion in Minecraft case, also known as the Kansk teenager case, revolves around 3 schoolboys: Nikita, Denis, and Bogdan. They were detained by the FSB in 2020. While some compare FSB to the FBI in the United States, that's not quite accurate. As Dr. Kevin Ryle, the lecturer in intelligence and security studies at the Brunel University of London, explains, the FSB combines, and I quote, security, law enforcement, counterintelligence, border control, and intelligence powers in one organization, end quote. These functions, I think, are divided into multiple branches in other countries. However, what I described makes FSB very powerful. At the time of the detention, the boys were just 14 years old, and just like any other teenager, they spent time going to school, hanging out with friends, and playing video games, especially Minecraft. Hold that thought, we will come back to that later. They also were deeply impressionable and reacted acutely to what was going on around them. One day they decided, we want to do something, like something for a social cause. And they distributed flyers for a social cause that supported political prisoners. Now, they walked around, they hang one of the flyers on the FSB administration building, they got hungry, they grabbed some snacks, Pringles chips, I'm sure you know those. They walked around and they said, okay, time to call it quits, let's go home. The next day, the minors were detained. Russian law is clear about the detention of minors. According to Article 91 of the Criminal Procedure Code and Article 14 of the Federal Law on the Prevention of Negligent and Juvenile Delinquency, minors can only be detained if they are suspected of committing a crime or caught committing an administrative offense. Such suspicions must be documented and justified. While details on Denis's and Bogdan's detentions remain limited, we do know what happened to Nikita. The timeline of his detention is as follows. The FSB detained him on the street the next day after he hung the flyers on their building. His mother received a call at 8:53 p.m. to come to the station, and by 10 p.m., officers were asking them to sign a voluntary search order. Unfortunately, I do not have access to the detention records, but from his mom's own written statement shared in an interview with Insider, I can gather what happened. But let me tell you from her perspective. I'm going to quote from the text. It's a bit lengthy, so bear with me. This is what she said. On the fourth floor of the investigative committee, in an office, my son was with 5 officers. I asked what would happen to them, to which the mayor, Chumichev, said, nothing, they're just kids. At that time, my son's phone was already seized by the officers. Why isn't my signature on the phone seizure protocol? She continues, the atmosphere was calm. The major seemed like a kind officer. He even offered Nikita a Snickers. He said the boys were smart, but woe from wit, quoting famous Russian author Griboyedov. Why I wasn't given the seizure protocol, I don't know, she says. Then, after that, they photographed him, took his fingerprints, and asked for his personal details. I mentioned that I was raising my son alone. It seemed to please them. They also told me to write a statement of consent for a search of the apartment and to voluntarily hand over any flyers and other items. Since it was late, around 10:30 p.m., they told me to write a statement of consent to cooperate with the authorities during the nighttime hours. End quote. But the things only escalated from there. Under Russian law, juveniles are entitled to specific protections during criminal proceedings. These include the right to have a guardian or lawyer present during questioning, limitations on detention, and a focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Russia is also a signatory to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which emphasizes that rehabilitation of minors is important and that the prohibition of inhumane treatment is something to look out for. Here is an issue, though. What's written in the law doesn't always match what happens in reality. The phones seized during detention revealed several chats on VK, a Russian version of Facebook, and Telegram, where the teenager discussed political, historical topics. They were quoting anarchists such as Petr Kropotkin and Yegor Letov. They are the figures in the Russian history of anarchist movement. Moving on. According to the expert analysis conducted by the FSB, one of the accused, Nikita, had shared materials, and I quote, that instilled uncertainty about the future, promoted the value of rebellion, criticized mind-numbing labor, no idea what they meant by that, and displayed hostility towards the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. End quote. The initial investigation revealed that the teenagers had been setting off fireworks in deserted areas, something they insisted was just for fun. During searches, law enforcement also, that was a search in the apartment. Remember, I mentioned that later in the night they went to search the apartments. They found chemicals that can be purchased at pharmacies. However, no explosive device was uncovered or discovered. Unfortunately, I also don't have the exact protocol for the seizure of the chemicals, and I cannot confirm whether they were truly linked to the explosive devices. But what I do have is a direct statement from the main investigative committee of the Investigative Committee of Russian Federation from the Krasnoyarsk territory and the Republic of Khakassia. This is what it says. Also, it's a bit lengthy, but bear with me. The investigative bodies of the Investigative Committee have initiated a criminal case against 3 14-year-old teenagers suspected of committing a crime using Article 205.3 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, which is training for the purpose of carrying out terrorist activities. According to the preliminary investigation from October 2019 to June of 2020, the 3 minors, identified as adherents of anarchist views, underwent joint training by reading banned literature, by watching videos on manufacturing explosive and explosive devices. They allegedly practiced their skills in abandoned houses, vacant lots, and they went to construction sites. The investigation is ongoing and all circumstances of the alleged crime are being clarified. End quote. So let's unpack this, because I do have a lot of questions about this statement. Unfortunately, this is the only statement I have to go off of. I'm sure if there were other statements available, I would have more details, but let's work with what we have. I don't understand what exactly constitutes training in the context. In general, the language in the statement raises some important questions about balance and presumption of innocence. For instance, terms like adherence of anarchist views instead of reportedly holding anarchist views. And another statement that raised question, underwent joint training by reading banned literature rather than allegedly underwent training. This, to me, suggests a level of certainty in the allegations that is not yet supported by evidence shared publicly. I'm not trying to be picky, guys, but because we are talking about minors, this choice of words risks framing the teenagers as guilty before the trial has even fully completed or examined, right? Now, let's look at this from the perspective of the defendants. From the very beginning, Nikita denied all charges. In Nikita's own words, I quote, "It all started with the flyers we put up. The FSB saw them as justification for terrorism because they mentioned people accused in the network case. And for them, that already counts as justification for terrorism, simply because we supported political prisoners charged under such articles." End quote. Let me clarify. Nikita is referring to the network case, an allegedly anti-government anarchist organization that was active in Russia from 2015 to 2017. Its alleged members were arrested in 2017 and sentenced in the military court to prison terms ranging from 6 to 18 years. But that's besides the point. Moving on. In the same interview, this is what Nikita said. When the investigators found out our messages where we discussed anarchism and the current political system, they decided to use that against us, framing it as a motive. Essentially, our theoretical intentions and our views, he continues, our dislikes for the FSB and the state as a whole were, in their opinion, enough to serve as a justification, end quote. Because Nikita denied his charges, he was placed in Sizo. We talked about that in the previous case, what it was. Sizo is a detention center, essentially. Other two teenagers, initially confessed to the crimes, and then they were placed under house arrest. Although later one of the boys did break the rules of the house arrest. He was not allowed to use internet. He did use internet, and then he was placed in Sizo. The defendant and his family also raised serious concerns about mistreatment during the investigation. During the first interrogation, an investigator reportedly questioned Nikita repeatedly about videos that he found on his phone, where the teenagers were throwing homemade firecrackers at the wall. Nikita explains, "Well, it was interesting. We were having fun, just messing around." These experiments were conducted in a deserted area, often supervised by parents. For example, Bogdan's mother, a correctional officer, was present for some of the child's chemistry experiments. When the investigator asked again, "Why would you do this?" And again, "Why would you do this?" In total, he asked him that 5 times. The mom said, "Can you stop? You already asked him. He gave you the answer." To which the investigator said, "If you don't shut up, I'm gonna throw you out of here." End quote. This incident highlights the potential procedural violations, especially since she didn't receive the property seizure protocol for her son's phone, which, in my opinion, could raise questions about the admissibility of the evidence they found in the phone in courts. Other examples of alleged abuse include Nikita alleges that during the detention, when he was put in the car, one of the officers hit him on the head. Another alleged allegation of abuse was that all boys in one of the interrogations were questioned for over 10 hours without a break, water, or food. Lastly, there is another allegation that states a transport vehicle, which is usually known as a paddy wagon, was observed outside the courthouse before the verdict was issued, which is raising concerns about potential bias or predetermination. There is one chilling moment that I cannot forget. When the interrogations finished, the very first ones, the children just came out of the rooms and they greeted each other, and one of the kids said to Nikita, whispered in his ear, "Hey, at least they didn't torture you. Did they?" End quote. It's worth emphasizing that the boys were just 14 years old at that time. And if the listed allegations are true, they raise serious concerns about the compliance with juvenile justice practices and human rights protections. Although Nikita's family reportedly attempted to file charges over the procedural violations, it appears that there was no formal investigation opened. Okay, at this point, you might be asking, what the hell does Minecraft have to do with all of this? Well, let me tell you. One of the boys' lawyer, Anton Kolosov, shared with the Russian news station called TV Rain the following. I quote, "During a game of Minecraft, one of the young men wrote, 'Let's blow up the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Dot. Just kidding. Comma. Of course.' 13 smiles." Experts from the investigative committee analyzed this correspondence, and they concluded that the teenagers genuinely intended to blow up the Minister of Internal Affairs. Let that sink in. With all 5 initially detained children, remember, it was 5 of them. The 4th child, named Ivan, who to me remains a vague figure. He had a chat correspondence with Nikita where he said to Nikita, I quote, "Welcome to our terrorist organization." Nikita replies, "Now the FSB might know our apartment," end quote. The fifth teenager who participated in the chat was the grandson of the former mayor of Kransk, Nadezhda Kachan. She appeared on Krasnoyarsk Channel 7 and stated that the boys, and I quote, "absolutely understood what they were doing. They were preparing for serious action," end quote. However, her grandson ultimately was not charged with any crimes. This raises the question, did the chats these teenagers participated in had real concrete plans, or were they merely speculative discussions? To me, honestly, it's hard to say because I don't have access to the full chats. Okay, so now let me take you to the courts. First things first, this is a military court. There are no journalists inside. There is no representation from the public. Before I present to you all of the official statements from lawyers, let me tell you the charges that were presented, a full list of charges. Trust me, you're not ready for this. Article 205.3, training for the purpose of carrying out terrorist activities. It provides for a punishment of imprisonment for a term of 15 to 20 years. Article 223.1, illegal manufacturing of explosives and illegal manufacturing, modification, or repair of explosive devices. Article 222.1, illegal acquisition, transfer, sale, storage, transportation, shipment, or carrying of explosive or explosive devices. Article 205.4, organization of a terrorist community and participation in it, but this particular charge was dropped due to lack of evidence and was not presented in the trial. Since 2016, the panel of judges led by the head judge covering this case or overseeing this case has not issued a single acquittal on terrorist charges. So, all of the three lawyers of the three boys prepared them for the worst. Deliberations begin. According to the prosecution, based on the evidence presented, and let me remind you the evidence, it consisted of not only chats on VK and Telegram, discussions in Minecraft, but also chemicals found at their homes, banned literature, and the flyers they distributed. So, according to the investigation, investigative committee concludes Nikita adhered to anarchist ideology, planned a terrorist act in Kansk, and enlisted the help of his two friends. The teenagers allegedly agreed, began discussing the plan to, quote, blow up the FSB building constructed in their computer game Minecraft, and created 2 Molotov cocktails. I'm still quoting what the prosecution said. And created 2 Molotov cocktails and 4 improvised explosive devices with sharple effects using a manual initiation method. I continue. The investigators, however, did not establish the exact time of the alleged crime to which the teenagers were charged, and they were asking for 9 years. From the defendant's perspective, this is what they said. There were attempts to challenge the admissibility of evidence obtained without a protocol and a guardian present. I don't know to which extent and how exactly they did that, but my suspicion is that that was part of the deliberation from their perspective, at least from the information I was able to gather. I might be wrong here. But what's clear is that all 3 lawyers asked the judge to acquit the teenagers on the grounds that they had not committed any crime. They provided counter-analysis by independent experts that refuted the interpretation of Minecraft chats, as well as other chats. They also presented positive character assessments. They questioned the analysis of the chemicals seized and whether they were truly linked to explosive devices. Kolosov, who is the lawyer of one of the boys, he specifically insisted that kids experimented with chemicals as a science project. Not to mention, he emphasized kids' willingness to collaborate, and that should count for something. The temperature in the courtroom was a bit complicated, or confusing rather, because Nikita's lawyer said the following: there are no particular complaints about the court or the process. The panel handled the case with dignity, end quote. But Kolosov, the lawyer of the other boy, says the contrary. In an interview with the TV Rain Russian channel, he said, and I quote, there was multiple violations. I recorded them on 55 pages alone when I addressed the court, end quote. Now, here's the final verdict. On February 10, 2022, Nikita, at that time 16 years old, was sentenced to 5 years in a juvenile correctional facility. He was found guilty under the article of 205.3 of the Russian Criminal Code, which is undergoing training for the purpose of carrying out terrorist activities, as well as under the article of 223.1 and 222.1, which are illegal manufacturing and possessions of explosive devices, and immediately was taken to the juvenile correctional facility by the paddy wagon that was there outside waiting. As for the other two defendants, they received probation sentences for 3 to 4 years, respectively. I can't speak English. Respectfully. For manufacturing explosives. Why? Well, lawyer of Bogdan, Kolosov, says the following. They received probation because they initially actively assisted in uncovering and investigating the crime, end quote. In his final statement, Nikita said this. I was hurt by the fact that in my country, people and civil activists who wish the best for the country and stand for its well-being are being repressed. Now, unfortunately, I have experienced firsthand the despotism of unscrupulous officials in the system. I never wrote that I was planning or preparing to blow up anything because I wasn't planning anything and I didn't prepare anyone. In the correspondence that was examined, we were simply discussing whether the FSB officers were bad people, or perhaps good ones, who could be persuaded and informed that they might be wrong, that anarchists are not bad. He continues, that's what I thought, and that's why I suggested to Denise that we put up flyers about anarchists, especially on the FSB building. He ends with this, I feel at peace, because I never taught my friends anything bad. I was not their teacher. We were equals and just friends. I didn't accuse anyone falsely. I feel no shame before the people, whether close to me or strangers who know our story. Let some believe the law enforcement instead of me, but I have nothing to be ashamed of. I never intended to blow anything up, end quote. On May 16, 2022, after they filed for appeal, the Military Court of Appeals upheld the sentence. Later, on January 17, 2023, last year, the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation also left Nikita's sentence unchanged. In closing, I want to share a few thoughts. From August 12 to September 2nd of this year, Nikita was held at the Regional Tuberculosis Hospital, where he developed pneumonia. After returning to the correctional colony, he was immediately placed in the medical unit. He spent his 19th birthday in the hospital on August 17th. In a Telegram channel supporting Nikita, the admin shared a quick summary of his mom's visit to jail recently. She recounts the following. I asked if anyone had congratulated him there, she means on the birthday. Nikita replied that one person did, someone who was also imprisoned under Article 205, end quote. In the early days following his arrest, Nikita shared that he dreams of becoming a journalist. His mother said, well, this came as a surprise, but I was happy that he already had a direction that he was passionate about, end quote. And if you'd like to support Nikita, you can write him a letter to wish him maybe a belated happy birthday or share advice on what professions he should choose and why. You know, whether it's tips, words of encouragement, or simply a kind message, I'm sure he would greatly appreciate hearing from you. I will include instructions in the description box below on how you can send him a letter. What do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.